We got one more guest here for this Wednesday edition of the show. That is Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, and the number 1 on Twitter. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Hi, Adam. Doing all right, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Appreciate your time here. I know it's a very busy time of year for you with those daily winter sports in full swing. Do get a little bit of a break with the NHL going on the All-Star break here on Friday. But let's go ahead and start with Super Bowl 52 and talk a little bit about this line, some of the movement that we've seen thus far, and really there hasn't been a whole lot. I mean, if you open 6, you're down to 5. If you open 5, you're pretty much sitting where you were. Not a whole lot going on here thus far.
Yeah, I think, this has been pretty steady. I think, obviously, as you get closer to the game, you're going to get more and more movement. I mean, the early returns, I guess, on this game is you're going to see, and I hate these terms, but, I mean, it's typical like pros versus Joes. You're going to see, I think, more of the public on the Patriots and maybe some of the wise guys on the Eagles here, but I mean, that doesn't mean, and because this is such a highly bet game, it's hard to really lump people into just two groups because I'm sure there's going to be your sharper bettors that also like the favorite and some public bettors that also like Philadelphia. So, but I mean, by and large, I think you're seeing that. I mean, I think some of the line maybe that Gronk is considered questionable, but I think he's going to play. This is 2 weeks between the game, and this is the Super Bowl. I mean, he's going to play, unless he would have like a broken leg or a broken back or something very extreme. Not that a concussion is not, but he's going to play in this game. So I don't know how much that's really affecting the line here, but I mean, I think it's going to probably stay in a range. I don't see it moving more than a point or anything either way. So I kind of think these lines, when you have so much action and so much volume on the game, kind of usually stay where they are.
Well, and for our listeners that are just tuning in or those that are maybe just listening to this segment, apologies that I sound a little bit different. I couldn't connect to Blog Talk Radio the same way here this morning that I usually do, so I probably do sound a little bit different, maybe picking up a little bit more background noise, something like that, so I do apologize for that. But, Wes, one of the things that's really intriguing to me about this line, I talked about this with Ed Feng yesterday, is that when you look at the Philadelphia lines for the divisional round and the conference championship round, 3 or 2.5 against Atlanta, 3.5 opener against Minnesota, closed 3 pretty much market wide. They should be getting a full 3 for home field advantage in those two situations. So that line against Atlanta would imply 5.5 or 6 on a neutral. Minnesota, again, 6.5 on a neutral. Well, here we're on a neutral against New England, and this number is 5. And I feel like, to me, as I'm kind of looking at that, I'm trying to decide if it's recency bias with how Foles played and how they blew out Minnesota, if it's the uncertainty of Gronkowski, if it's how Brady and the Patriots struggled a little bit with Jacksonville, or maybe this is a context clue that the market is sort of expecting Philadelphia to be the sharp side. So rather than go 6, they went ahead and put it in that dead zone around 5 and kind of told the market, hey, you guys decide where you want to put it.
Yeah, I think you're right there because I think clearly that the Eagles have picked up more believers in the last 2 weeks. How everybody kind of thought that season was done out in Los Angeles when they played I think it was the Rams. It might have been the Chargers. It was one of the two teams where Carson Wentz got hurt, and they kind of thought that these guys were done. And they picked up a couple more believers. I think a lot more believers, really. And I think, when the Eagles were really rolling at them and when they had Wentz, I mean, that guy was going to probably win the NFL MVP. The Eagles were playing great. I mean, they were really the top power-rated team, almost consensus in the league. And I think when you take the quarterback away, people kind of forgot about that this is a pretty good team, that this was more than just a hot quarterback, that this was a good defense that was getting turnovers. This was a defense that could move the ball both through the air and on the ground, and picking up Ajayi and Blunt. They obviously had. They were running the ball really well before they even had Jay Ajayi. So, this team was a pretty complete team and almost the consensus top team in the league. So you have that. You add the Gronkowski potential injury, even though I think most people believe he's going to play. I certainly do. But you also look at the Patriots last week. Jaguars had their chance to put him away, and really couldn't do it. And, it almost felt like the Patriots, and you're not taking away from their victory, but it almost felt a little bit like they kind of escaped, where the Jaguars had their chances, and it's like they couldn't convert. And you know that if you give the Patriots enough chances that they're going to burn you. And they drove down the field late and got a touchdown, and Jacksonville couldn't respond. So it was almost like the Patriots kind of, not only won the game and do what they do, but it was a little bit, I think there's a perception maybe a little bit that they kind of escaped last week. So that's where I kind of think why this line is where it is. And I think it's a pretty good line in the fact that, you let guys determine where it's going to be, and I think, that you can make a case for either side, clearly. You can always make a case for the Patriots, but, I think the fact that people realize now that the Eagles are a pretty good team even without Carson Wentz.
One of the things that I'll be really interested in seeing is, obviously here we don't have an NFL game unless you consider the Pro Bowl to be one, but you've got 2 weeks here in between the conference championship round and the Super Bowl, and one of the things that's been very telling in both college football and the NFL this year is that we've seen significant game day movements. We've seen the numbers grabbers go out there early in the week, and then as limits increase in the middle of the week, we see a little bit of movement, a little bit of action, a couple of adjustments to the lines. But this year, probably more so than any previous year, we saw avalanches of not just public money, but sharp money on game day as well. And it kind of makes me wonder, when we start to see some involvement on this game. We saw the sixes go away, and that was, I guess, sharp guys out there grabbing the number, expecting this thing to go down a little bit like it has. But outside of that, we're going to see 90 to 95% of the action on the side in total for this game probably come in Saturday and Sunday of not this upcoming weekend, but of game weekend. So I'm kind of curious to hear from you, Wes, on when you think we may actually, see this number go to 4.5, maybe see it inch closer to 6. I don't know if it moves at all until maybe the middle of next week.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think you're going to see probably some action this weekend, being that there's, just the Pro Bowl. I'm not personally betting the Pro Bowl, but some people will, and some people will do parlays, or some people will do their teasers, because, the only thing with a single game that you can really do a teaser with, I suppose you could do a cross-sport one, but, you can really only kind of tease the side of the total in this game. You don't have enough, 2 conference championships to do that. So, the only other football game that you can really try to tease this with is the Pro Bowl. And, the Pro Bowl is just not something I really bet very much. And, you'll have potentially, if people want to tease it with the Senior Bowl, this Saturday, but that's so tough to bet those all-star games, because those aren't really, those are showcases for talent for the draft, and that's what people care about in that game. Nobody remembers, if the North or the South won the Senior Bowl 2 years ago. So, in terms of teasers, that's going to really be your option. I think you'll see a little bit come in over the weekend, because some people will go ahead and do that with all-star games, essentially. I don't think that those are the best bets to do this with, but in terms of, straight bets and money line bets, I think the second week is where most of the action is clearly going to come.
Yeah, and the thing about the Senior Bowl this year, too, is Joe Everett actually asked me if I wanted him to talk about it on the show here on Monday, and I said, not really, and he said that's fine, because there are 8 different quarterbacks on hand, and each quarterback's going to get a quarter. So if you're looking for any kind of flow, any kind of consistency, anything like that in the Senior Bowl, you're not going to find it. So definitely not something that you really want to invest in too much here. And Wes, last thing I'll ask you about the Super Bowl, and then we'll transition over to golf for a few minutes is, I know that you mentioned that you haven't really done too much of your prop homework yet, and I don't blame you. I mean, because of the high volume that you do across all the other sports, hard to find time to worry about something that's 10 days in advance here. But I did want to ask you this. You are a high-volume guy, so you're used to processing a lot of data, reading the market very quickly, having a good feel for what's going on out there. Does that skill set help you when it comes to the vast amount of props that we have, or is there not really a correlation between the two?
It's really hard in terms of doing the high volume with the props, because I mean, one of the thing with the props I try to do is maybe not focus. I mean, because you're trying to find as much of an edge as you can where there's going to be less movement. You know that the movement in some of these player props especially are going to be on the guys that are kind of the featured players. Tom Brady, Deion Lewis, Nick Foles, Alshon Jeffrey, Gronk, those type of players, where you're really going to see the movement. So you're looking a little bit maybe at some of the lesser players. I mean, somebody like not saying lesser players, but maybe less featured players. Maybe you're looking at a James White, or maybe you're looking at not that Zach Ertz and James White are not prominent players for these teams, but you're kind of looking at those players, maybe the guys that are like your second, third, fourth options, instead of maybe looking at the top guys, and then you're looking at and even with the defense. I mean, I've done pretty well finding some places with defense, with tackle props. Guys that are going to be in on lots of tackles, and looking at stuff like that. And I think plus the prop market right now, you don't have all the books really with their stuff up yet. I mean, some are going to have a more limited prop action, your traditional stuff. And then some are going to have, some of your bigger books are going to have, 10 to 15 pages of props, where they're going to have cross-sport props with golf, or with an NBA, or with a big college basketball game, where they're going to have these cross-sport options. So you don't really know where you're going to have it. And I mean, it's such a big thing to kind of dig into. And some are going to have, where you might only have 3, 4, 5 books with props up on a certain thing, and then obviously every single book on the planet is going to have Tom Brady passing yards, Tom Brady touchdowns. So it's really, I mean, it's a total shopper's deal, instead of just crunching numbers and doing your averages and seeing what you like. I mean, I think you totally got to shop around here with these things. So it's really a different market that I think people play, because they don't play it week to week, because the prop market isn't as big in regular season. So it's like a totally different market and a totally different handicap when you're doing it for the Super Bowl.
No, I think it's a great note there you made there about shopping around for the best lines and also the best juice. And again, you can also sort of get an idea based on the sports book you're looking at of if something is a little bit sharper in nature. Because you're going to see different juice at different books, and Bovada is going to have something very different than what Five Dimes is going to have, than what BetOnline is going to have, than what DSI will have, Pinnacle as well. So you want to make sure that you're shopping around and crowdsourcing, not just for the best lines, but also looking for some of those clues there on how some of the sharp players think that these games may play out. Some of the model guys, some of the daily fantasy guys. I mean, this is kind of their area of expertise. So lots of options out there when it comes to the props, and we'll touch a lot more on them next week once everybody's got their numbers posted, once all of our guests and myself have a chance to digest some of these numbers here and give you some good tips and some direction on where to go with those. But, Wes, let's talk about the Farmers Insurance Open here as we transition over to the PGA Tour side of things. And, this one at Torrey Pines, you've got 2 different courses on Thursday and Friday here, and this is the point that I want to start with, because there are a few events here early on in the season where you get this type of thing. The South Course, 7,700 yards. The North Course, a little bit more of your traditional 72, 7,300 yard par 72. Looks like the weather forecast has changed a little bit. Early in the week, it was supposed to be windy on Thursday. Now it looks like the winds have died down considerably in the forecast. But, in terms of looking at guys here that have to play the South Course first, is that a benefit for you? Because if you're trying to make the cut tomorrow, you're on the easier course.
Yeah, and I think one thing to advise, I mean, for those that listen that might do like the first round leader market, I mean, I always watch the market, but there's only a few times a year where I really get involved with first round leader. You obviously, if you're playing first round leader, want to play the guys on the North Course, which is the shorter, the easier course, the Tom Weiss Cup design. They play the traditional South Course, the Reese Jones design over the weekend. So you really want to play the dudes on the North Course tomorrow, because those are the guys that are going to shoot your 65s and whatnot. And I mean, the South Course, good rounds are probably going to be 68, 67. Well, that's not going to be your first round leader, because somebody inevitably in a 156 player field is going to go low and shoot 6-7 under that first day on the North Course. And then, you kind of usually see them come back to the field on Friday when they got to play that South Course. I mean, you seemingly see it every year. Somebody shoots 63 and then they shoot 73, and they go into the weekend a solid 4 under, but you kind of see them come back a little bit. And I mean, you haven't traditionally, you've seen some years where there's been some higher scores. I mean, you've seen 15, 16 under win this thing, but you've also seen, if the wind picks up, that guys are going to be in single digits winning this thing. I mean, 2 years ago, Brent Snedeker 6 under and just happened to get the good side of the course, and he was way back in the field, but just happened to get the good wind, and the guys that were the leaders that day, because there was a delay where they had to do a Monday finish, and those guys, the wind just killed those guys that were in those final several groups. So, that's a little bit what you want to look at. It makes it an interesting handicap here. Now, a lot of times you got to look at the matchups. Very few books, sometimes they will, but very few books are going to make the mistake where they pair the North Course golfer with the South Course golfer. I mean, your smarter books like Westgate, I mean, they're not going to do that. But some books might, and that's where you can try to kind of, look over it with a fine-tooth comb and see if you can exploit something that way.
Yeah, that's information you can find on PGAtour.com to see which guys are playing which course on Thursday, and then the same thing on Friday. And then you mentioned 2 years ago when Brant Snedeker won, and it wasn't even just the wind. I mean, it was a very rainy day as well. If I remember correctly, some trees fell on the property. I mean, it was a big-time storm that rolled through. A lot of guys are putting up those final round 80s, and it was just one of those outlier types of tournaments. So when you go back through your course form data, which I know is a big part of your golf handicap, did you just cross out the 2016 tournament, or did you, find ways to incorporate it, but keep in mind the way it finished up?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of the latter. I mean, you certainly don't want to ignore it, but I mean, I think that because this is the regular course rotation, you get, I think, a pretty good sense of guys. And you look at different type of guys. I mean, some guys are West Coast specialists. Some guys are the Ben Graspoa Inua guys, green guys, and also some guys are good with coastal golf. So you kind of look at the correlation, and then you look at maybe results at some other courses that may correlate with Torrey Pines, and looking at some of the design things here. I mean, I found some different correlations in terms of with the course up at Canada, Glen Abbey. Some guys that have played well there, play well here. Some of the guys at the Heritage and Hilton Head also play well here. So, I mean, you're kind of just looking at different things, and then you're obviously looking at your recency form as well, in addition to the course form. So, I think you could still definitely incorporate that data.
John Rahm, the favorite here this week. I'm going off of 5 Dimes lines. He's plus 670. Ricky Fowler plus 1130. Justin Rose plus 1400. Hideki Matsuyama, who's a guy you want to keep in mind next week at the Waste Management Phoenix Open, although his price will certainly reflect that. He's plus 1650. Jason Day rounds out the top 5 about 20 to 1. But the guy who's on the 6 line here, he's got some people kind of all hot and bothered out there on Twitter with how he was swinging it in the Pro-Am. That's Tiger Woods. Plus 2050 here as he makes his PGA Tour return, at least in terms of a points event. Played the Hero World Challenge, about a month and a half or so ago. Wes, do you have any interest in Tiger Woods this week? I mean, obviously the futures price is not, a true indication of what his chances are of winning this tournament. But did you fade? Are you looking to fade him from a matchup standpoint, or are you just going to kind of leave him alone?
I may end up leaving him alone. What I kind of found is that I'm looking at the 2 guys that are playing with him, because obviously that's the featured group with him coming back, and the guys that drew him in the first 2 rounds were Patrick Reed and Charlie Hoff. And there's some people that like Hoffman this week, but those are guys I'm kind of perhaps looking to go against a little bit in matchups, because, I mean, playing with Tiger, there's a lot of eyeballs on you, and, I mean, you know that the crowd and the people are going to be with him. He's a guy that's won at this course 8 times. I mean, the Buick, and also won a U.S. Open, won a major here in that playoff with Rocco Mediate. So you're looking at a guy that this is the perfect place for Tiger to return. I mean, you want to return where you have success. I mean, is 20 to 1 fair odds? No, he probably should be. If you're including the Tiger Torrey Pines discount, he probably a fair odds would be around 40 to 1. But guys aren't going to put him that because they're going to get hammered at that line. So I think a lot of the books put him between 20 and 25, which was probably as reasonable as you were going to get here. But, I mean, people are going to bet Tiger at whatever price. And, the fact that he's out there for the Pro-Am. He birdied the first hole, and Twitter seemingly went nuts like he's back. But, I think to make the cut, if he's anything less than, if he's won between 175 and 200 are kind of the prices I've seen. And, I mean, I think it's reasonable that he's going to make the cut. Last time we saw him at the World Challenge, he wasn't too bad. And, I mean, he wasn't in contention, but he wasn't embarrassing himself. He looked like he was swinging a lot better. Seemed, at least on the surface, that he was more healthy. So, I don't think it's a great bet in the futures market, but I think maybe you could find some props, find maybe top 20, or you could find him to make the cut. I don't think those are the worst bets in the world.
All right, now as I mentioned here, the South Course, which is going to be played 54 of the 72 holes. You're only going to play 1 round on that North Course, and then everything else is going to be on the South Course. 7,700 yards. So it doesn't surprise me that on the list of guys that you've tipped over on your Twitter handle at Wes Reynolds, or your Twitter timeline at Wes Reynolds, the number 1, you've got several dudes that can really hit it a long way.
Yeah, and I mean, I looked at a couple guys that I like this week. Oliver Snyderton's, who I think is one of those young players that's kind of due to win at some point. Played very well at Wiley, ended up finishing 7th, but looking at kind of going a little bit deeper in the numbers, he had 24 birdies at the Sony Open and an eagle. And, I mean, the birdies, Mark placed him at the top of the field, obviously not winning. He, made some mistakes, which young guys are going to do. But, he's a guy that's had some pretty solid finishes. He plays well at coastal courses. Was second last year at Sea Island in Georgia at the RSM, was 9th here last year, was 3rd at Harbor Town. So he's a guy that kind of likes that coastal golf, and another guy that I think is a shorter price, but not one of the favorites that I really liked, was Mark Leishman, who's been twice a bridesmaid here at Torrey Pines over the years. Plays great in coastal golf. There's a lot of links with Tiger. If you want to look at where Tiger has really played well, I mean, his kind of course specialties, Augusta, St. Andrews, Firestone, Muirfield, and also Bay Hill. Those are courses that Mark Leishman has played pretty well at over his career. So, looking at that, Leishman is a guy like Johnny Vegas, who I think is playing the best golf of his career right now. Is a guy I also like. Tony Finau. Xander Schauffele, if you want to play the hometown angle, played at San Diego State. Obviously, won the Tour Championship last year, so he's a guy that comes in with some class. You're getting him at a good price at 60-1. So those are guys I look at. And then if you like form, Shane Lowry was in contention here last year. 50-1, one of the few Euros that are playing this week instead of in Dubai. So, there's some value, I think, on this board if you're not interested in taking Jon Rahm, who clearly probably is the clear favorite here. If you're not interested in taking him or Matsuyama or Rose or some of the shorter price guys, you can find some guys that I think are going to be there on Sunday.
Man, three of those guys in my daily fantasy article over at bangthebook.com. Looking at the local guy, Finau, and also Vegas. So those are the three guys that I've got in that daily fantasy piece. And again, I mean, you look at all of these different things. You look at guys that can really swing it on a long course like this. The local angle, you figure he's got some more familiarity with this course, with the conditions. And then also, a guy like Leishman that, as you mentioned, plays well on a lot of the same courses that Tiger plays well on. So I think those are all really, really good angles there for you to look at when it comes to golf. And Wes, before we sign off here, I mentioned looking at Hideki Matsuyama next week at the Waste Management, and he'll probably be 10-1, 12-1, something like that, on the high end because he's played so well in that event before. That is my favorite golf event of the year. I know everybody loves the majors. I certainly like watching Augusta, and I enjoy watching the British Open. But the party-esque atmosphere at the Waste Management it's phenomenal television.
It is exciting, and I mean the crowd really gets into it, and you usually are going to have a good field, and Matsuyama is going to be there, Ricky Fowler. I'm sure both Spieth and Thomas are going to play since they have taken the last 2 weeks off. Phil Mickelson, of course, being from the Scottsdale area, is always a crowd favorite. So you're starting to get in the swing now where we're really getting good full fields in these events, and you're right in the middle of the West Coast swing. You have the Middle East swing over in Europe. So you're starting to see some really quality balanced fields, I think, in these events, and that makes it a lot more fun.
Well, for those interested in tonight's college basketball, NBA, NHL, and anything else that Wes puts up, you can follow him on Twitter at Wes Reynolds, the number 1. Wes, appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again next week.
Okay, you bet, Adam. Have a good one.